Donald Trump closes the door on transgender bathrooms, while France's far-right presidential candidate cancels a meeting with Lebanon's Grand Mufti after she refuses to wear a headscarf. We'll examine the fallout from the biggest stories of the past 7 days in Insight Review. Welcome to Insight Review, our look back at the stories that have dominated the headlines for the past 7 days. It's been a week where autopsy results revealed Kim Jong-un's slain half-brother was killed with one of the world's most toxic nerve agents, and where a British Muslim teacher was kicked off his flight to New York without an explanation. We'll examine those stories and others with our guests, the editor-in-chief of the International Interest, Sami Hamdi, and the London Evening Standard's Home Affairs editor, Martin Bentham. But first, here's what you need to know about what happened this week, 7 days in 60 seconds. An Israeli soldier who shot and killed a Palestinian attacker in Hebron as he lay wounded on the ground has been jailed for 18 months. Prosecutors had called for 20-year-old Elor Azaria to face a charge of murder, but instead settled on a manslaughter plea. France's far-right presidential candidate cancelled a meeting with Lebanon's Grand Mufti after she refused to wear a headscarf. Critics, however, said Marine Le Pen was warned about the protocol well in advance and accused her of staging the incident. In Australia, a pilot and 4 passengers were killed when the light plane they were travelling in crashed shortly after takeoff. The aircraft suffered engine failure and plunged into the roof of a shopping centre in Melbourne. Malaysian police reported an attempted break-in at the mortuary where the body of Kim Jong-nam is being held. The estranged half-brother of North Korea's leader was sprayed with one of the world's most deadly nerve agents as he waited to board a flight earlier this month. And one of the 6 survivors of the Chapecoense plane crash in Colombia has taken his first steps on his new prosthetic leg. Former goalkeeper Jackson Follman was one of 3 players on the Brazilian team who survived the crash. Well, let's take you to Malaysia first, where the mystery surrounding the death of Kim Jong-un's half-brother continues to deepen. Results from an autopsy show that Kim Jong-nam was murdered using a highly toxic nerve agent known as VX, a substance so poisonous it's classed as a weapon of mass destruction by the United Nations. Let's take you through the diplomatic rumblings surrounding Kim's murder. On Monday, Malaysia recalled its envoy from Pyongyang and summoned North Korea's ambassador in Kuala Lumpur. It followed accusations from the north that Malaysia was colluding with South Korea. On Thursday, North Korean state media reported on Kim Jong-nam's death for the first time, condemning an autopsy carried out by Malaysian officials as both illegal and immoral. Malaysian police were also forced to beef up security at a morgue, following reports that thieves tried to break in and steal Kim's body. Well, joining me on the programme today, the editor-in-chief at the International Interest, Sami Hamdi, and the Home Affairs editor of the London Evening Standard, Martin Bentham. The big question, I suppose, Sami, is this is a whodunit. Who do you think done it?
Well, to be honest, it's incredible because, I mean, Kim Jong-nam, many people wonder why China is able to have such a hold on North Korea. One of the key reasons is because they've used the likes of Kim Jong-nam to threaten Kim Jong-un's position himself as an alternative leader to the party within North Korea. In terms of who done it, judging by the diplomatic repercussions, which is China has voiced its anger at what took place, Malaysia as well has voiced its anger, the only country with visa-free travel to North Korea, it seems most likely that the North Koreans did do it. I mean, North Korea has already been involved in a purge of former allies. Kim Jong-un executed his uncle. There are other family members who've slowly been killed and sidelined as well, as Kim Jong-un cements his power and makes sure that he is the only person capable of ruling North Korea.
Who gave the order, do you think, Martin?
Well, I assume it came right from the top of the North Korean state. It must have done, and actually the evidence that it's VX gas does seem to indicate again that it's a state-sponsored act, because I don't think VX gas is something which is just
well, your average assassin doesn't have
around for the average
in
assassin
their suitcase, do they?
yes.
No.
And obviously it's a very, very serious business.
It's something that we think the North Koreans would have, do we?
I don't know precisely, but it wouldn't be inconceivable by any means.
They're not signed up to the international convention which prevents a state having it, so... if that's any evidence at all, it may suggest it's one of the things they've got in the cupboard.
But I think with regards to North Korea, I mean, nobody really knows what they have and what they don't have. I mean, we hear in the news that they are a destitute country on the verge of economic collapse and the like, and then all of a sudden they're capable of assassinating somebody in the middle of Kuala Lumpur. They are able to, leverage the Chinese to make sure that the Chinese back them diplomatically. I mean, it's a case where nobody really knows what North Korea is actually really capable of. So it's not too far-fetched to assume that they have weapons such as the VX.
Well, not at all, not least when they've got nuclear weapons they're developing and so on. So, I mean, again...
And the ability to transport them from place to place, if the latest tests are anything to go by. But the whole scenario, by using 2 women are involved, there's 4 or 5 people in custody as we speak, they're looking for more. Even the suggestion, almost laughable, I suppose, to us, that they were told it was some kind of television prank show. Just go and do this to this person. I mean, does that stand up, do you think, Martin? Or will we ever find out if that was the accurate account of all this?
Well, we probably won't ever quite find out, will we? But the truth of the matter is, I suspect that perhaps they weren't told exactly what it was, although there was some evidence, wasn't there, that one of the women went to wash her hands very quickly.
Indeed. Well, she was seen vomiting, I think, afterwards, so she might have been ill, yeah.
Yes. But again, you might, if you're going to get somebody to carry that type of horrendous substance, you might not want to tell them they're actually doing that, because obviously it's a highly dangerous substance to the people who are carrying it.
Okay, well, let's turn now to the Trump administration and another change coming out of Washington. Tighter restrictions on visitors to the United States. This week, we heard from a British Muslim teacher who described how he was left feeling angry and humiliated after he was escorted off a plane in Iceland, which was bound for New York City. 25-year-old maths teacher Jahel Meyer, who was accompanying a group of his students on a trip abroad, said he was given no explanation on why he was banned from entering the USA.
As soon as she said I'm not allowed on the plane, I've been denied access to New York, I asked her on what grounds, because I explained to her I've got my visa in my bag, I've got every document needed, and they couldn't give me an explanation. And I asked the question more than once, and they couldn't give me an explanation. And still to this day, I haven't had an explanation why.
Sami Hamdi and Martin Bentham are with us today. Martin, this seems strange. This guy had not been to anyone on the banned most recent list, even though that list, of course, is held up by the courts. So why pick on him?
Well, I suspect, obviously we really don't know, because we haven't been told and probably never will be told what the precise reason was. But I suspect that, of course, there are watch lists and so on, and I suspect, quite frankly, the poor man was probably the inadvertent victim of some mistake, that maybe his name is similar to somebody who is on the watch list or whatever. So it strikes me that it's more than likely that that's actually what's happened. There's some indication of somebody of a similar name, and that's what's led to him being, it seems to all intents and purposes, completely
I mean, his name is Mohammed Meyer, isn't it, Samdi? Apparently he uses the word Jahel. Could that cause confusion? Maybe there's a Mohammed on his passport papers?
There is a hysteria on the borders with regards to the United States. I mean, Trump is talking about protecting our borders and the like, but in reality, it's already very difficult to get into the US as it is, with all the different checks that take place and all the different strip searches and the like. There is a very targeted approach towards Muslims. Disproportionate targeting when you consider the number of terrorist attacks that have been committed by non-Muslims in the US with regards to shooting and the like. In reality, there is, and I'll say it outright, there is a subconscious racism with regards to the border control. Now, that's not necessarily the fault of these border guards. I mean, they're being bombarded with news of, bearded men going around shouting Allahu Akbar and bombing, Paris and Nice and whatever. But the problem
this guy speaks with a wonderful Welsh accent, raised in Neath in South Wales, and knows about quadratic equations.
But he's a certain colour, and he looks a certain way. And the reality is, here is the real problem is, where do you strike the balance between security and alienating 1.6 billion people around the world? Because stories like these, they spread very fast on social media. And all of us, and I'll be honest with you, and a very innocent family man walking through passport control these days, even in Heathrow, is having to look around. Are they looking at me suspiciously? Do I look suspicious? Do I look guilty? And this only perpetuates and causes a very real social problem. It's not just limited to the borders. It's limited to the domestic security.
It will get, I suppose, and perhaps cause disproportionate harm, won't it? I mean, this is one guy, but they chose a guy who had, a bunch of school kids with him. So, of course, the story was going to get big.
Of course, and these things, exactly, you're quite right. These things do cause more harm than good. Quite clearly, there's no good achieved by stopping somebody who's not a threat and so on going to a country, and it creates a very negative impression. And actually, the whole tightening of US security, not just for people who are of a Muslim background, in fact, but just in general, when you remember after 9/11, it was increasingly rigorous attention paid to pretty well everybody who came in there.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of an off-putting thing. It doesn't create a good impression. And obviously, as you rightly say, there's a current sort of hysteria which has been generated by the new president.
And if it was an overzealous act, they never apologise, do they? They never admit that, I suppose.
No.
All right, we're going to stay with the Trump administration for our next story. They, this week, took steps to reverse a signature initiative of Barack Obama's presidency, federal legislation protecting the rights of transgender students in schools across the USA. So let's take you through the developments. In May last year, Obama's administration changed the rules in schools so that transgender students could use the toilet that matched their identities. The Trump administration's decision this week cancels the Obama administration's memos of the past 2 years, which found prohibiting transgender students from using facilities matching their identity was a violation of federal anti-discrimination laws. Under the new rules, states and school districts will now be able to decide whether students should have access to toilets and locker rooms that do not reflect their biological sex. Well, Sami Hamdi and Martin Bentham are here with us. This is a confusing one, Sami, as to who goes where. And in any case, the Obama edict was a voluntary one, I think. It wasn't actually to impose that you had to send these children into a bathroom of their sexual choice, identity choice. And in any case, the Obama edict is tied up in the courts and doesn't apply.
The issue here is, and this is going to sound very controversial, but I'll say it anyway. The problem is the debate surrounding the whole transgender topic. There is a particular viewpoint that Trump is now presenting that has been drowned out in the debate, which is that your sex is related to your biology. I mean, it's limited to what you are born, as opposed to what you desire to be.
Well, he didn't say that in the campaign, did he? He was asked about transgender people and where they should go to the toilet and where they should change. He said, oh, it's up to them. They could choose. But he's changed his mind.
He's definitely changed his mind. But he reflects a particularly conservative base in the US.
Right.
He reflects a particularly a base that is more anti-transgender, let's be honest here, anti-LGBT rights, and plus also Obama has been heavily criticized for spending his 8 years by his own, by the black community as well, that he focused mainly on middle class, LGBT rights and everything else, but didn't focus on the plights of the working class individual in the US. And I think Trump's proposition here, in which he's going back on the Obama edict and the like, will go down very well with Trump's base, if I'm particularly
Yes, and he did win, so he's got a right to say what he wants, didn't he?
Well, he does, and obviously, as you rightly say, there's a fair split in the United States between the socially conservative section of the population and the more liberal type, obviously. And part of this goes back to giving the states the individual right, which is another US concept.
Yeah, it is a battle between states and federal, isn't it?
Yes, and so on. Personally, I think it's a retrograde step that actually it's fairly harmless to allow a fairly small number of people the ability to go into a toilet of their choosing. So, but obviously that's not quite how some very conservative-minded people would see it.
I think surely on the practical, you've heard stories from the States about it. It's actually really quite complicated, this, isn't it? Because if you think you're trying to be liberal and send a boy who thinks he's chosen to be take on the female persona into a female changing room, some of the females in there might not like that.
Well, that's true.
And don't accept it. So it's not a simple, oh, of course, that's the right thing to do, that's the wrong thing to do. There's all sorts of controversy. It's actually a no-win situation, is it? You can't please everyone.
But this is the point I was saying. That viewpoint has been drowned out in the debate. To say that almost appears to say you are anti-liberal values, you are anti-human rights, you are anti a particular section of society.
There's some serious pragmatics.
Well, it is a question of whose privacy and whose rights, isn't it? There's a balance between the rights of those people who might feel uncomfortable by having a biological male in the female toilet, as opposed to the rights of the person who is a transgender person who wants to go into the female toilet, for example. So there is that balance of rights, and there's always going to be a difference of opinion, I suppose, as to whose rights should prevail over the other. I mean, personally, I would go with the Obama line more than the Trump line, but there we are. And I can recognise exactly as you say the countervailing argument.
And anyway, the whole thing's stuck in the courts and probably won't be sorted out for another few years. But there we are. We'll leave that one there. Thank you for the moment. This is Insight Review. Coming next, France's far-right leader stirs up controversy in Lebanon after refusing to wear a headscarf in order to meet the country's Grand Mufti.